Hello friends, this is Vaibhav Purandare here, and my new video is about a subject that's being discussed across the world. That subject is J. Robert Oppenheimer. Don't worry, there are going to be no spoilers at all in this video about Christopher Nolan's new movie. What we are going to discuss, of course, is Oppenheimer's life and in particular his reference to the Bhagavad Gita and his quote from the Bhagavad Gita. He quoted a line from the Bhagavad Gita which is perhaps the most quoted line as far as the development of the atomic bomb is concerned. What is Oppenheimer's exact quote? Oppenheimer in the year 1965 gave an interview to NBC in the US, and he was asked how he felt when the atomic bomb test in 1945 turned out to be successful. He said at that point his words were, "I am become death, destroyer of worlds." This is a quote from the Gita. I am death, I am become death, destroyer of worlds. Here he is quoting from chapter 11 and verse 32. That verse talks about how Krishna, during his address to Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, is talking about the divine form. He takes the divine form and he explains to Arjuna the meaning of dharma and why he should be doing his duty, and which the Gita itself talks about as it's as if 1,000 suns have emerged. It has the radiance of 1,000 suns. So this is the exact place in which the quote comes. I am become death, destroyer of worlds. The question to ask is, did Oppenheimer really say this in 1945 when the atomic test was successful? No. He did not say it at that point in time. He claimed in 1965, that is exactly 2 decades after the nuclear test was conducted, that he had said this in 1945. But in 1945, nobody heard him saying this. He was interviewed a number of times by various newspapers, television channels in the US, but he did not say that to anybody at that point in time. But later on, he said that that is what he had said. So what we can guess really, this is the thought that came to Oppenheimer's mind. We don't have to say that he's lying. I don't think he was lying. What he was trying to say is, this is the thinking that came to him when the bomb turned out to be successful. Now, how did this thinking come about? We'll get to that question, but before that, let me first finish with this quote of the Bhagavad Gita. Now, there is a lot of debate about the interpretation of this quote. Is he quoting the Gita correctly? There is a theory that he is not quoting the Gita correctly. Now, the exact word that is used in the original Sanskrit of the Gita is Kalosmi. Kal and Asmi. Kal is translated by most Gita scholars, including Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, Annie Besant and other scholars, as time or the time spirit, the vast expanse of time. I am Kal, Asmi. Asmi is I am. So I am Kal, which Oppenheimer has translated as I am become death. Now, why is he saying I am become death? Where does he get this word from? This is where we get into the background of Oppenheimer's study of the Bhagavad Gita. When did he study the Bhagavad Gita? Oppenheimer was from a Jewish German family. He was born in 1904 and raised in New York and other places. He went to Harvard to study. He was a brilliant young man, went to Harvard to study. He was a lover of science and he was a lover of literature as well. He read George Eliot, T.S. Eliot, he read Shakespeare, he read very widely in his youth. He went to Harvard, and it is in Harvard where he studied between 1922 and 1925 that he started reading the Gita for the first time in translation, because he was tremendously interested in philosophy. So he started reading the Gita but in translation. That's what he does. Then he goes to Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, one of the great institutes in the world. He joins it, he gets a job there as a professor of physics in 1929. Now here at the University of California, Berkeley, there is a professor called Arthur W. Ryder. His full name is Arthur William Ryder. He is a professor of Sanskrit at this university. And he is also known as a translator of many Sanskrit works. Among the works he is translated is the Bhagavad Gita. What Oppenheimer does is, in the early 1930s, he starts learning Sanskrit from Arthur Ryder, who is at the same University of Berkeley. In 1931, he writes for the first time in a letter to his brother that he started studying Sanskrit from Arthur Ryder. Then in 1933, in another letter that he writes to his brother Frank, Oppenheimer says that he has started reading the Gita in the original. But significantly, Oppenheimer has read Arthur Ryder's translation, and that translation says Kalasmi. It translates Kalosmi as I am become death. So it was Ryder who had translated it as I am become death and not I am time, मैं काल हूँ, मैं समय हूँ. He had not translated it like that. So there is a debate. There are many scholars who say the translation is completely wrong because Kal is not death. It cannot be literally translated as death. There is another theory that it may be a peculiar kind of translation, but it is not entirely incorrect. He has interpreted it correctly, or partly correctly at least, because death is a part of Kal. Because Kal is the vast sweep of time, and that sweep of time includes births, deaths, and reincarnations until the moment of moksha, that is salvation. So there are two theories whether it's correct or not correct, but this is exactly what he quotes, and that this is why the debate has arisen in the first place. Now what happens? He reads the Gita in the original, he learns the Gita, he reads Sanskrit, and he develops a habit of keeping a copy of the Gita, the original Gita, and also translations of his Gita, of the Gita, on his desk and on the bookshelf which is nearest to him wherever he is working. When he goes to Los Alamos, that is the place in New Mexico where the atomic bomb project is going to be undertaken, and Oppenheimer is placed at the head of that project. He is placed in charge of that project in 1944. Even in Los Alamos, there is evidence that he was carrying a copy of the Gita with him, and it was close to him, either on his desk or on his bookshelf there. So that's very interesting. Another interesting reference that comes to us from various biographies is that in 1945, Franklin Roosevelt, the President of the United States, dies in April that year, 1945. And when he dies, Robert Oppenheimer is his real name. J stands for Julius, that's his father's name, J. Robert Oppenheimer. So when Roosevelt dies, Oppenheimer addresses a memorial meeting for Roosevelt, where again he quotes the Gita, but this time he quotes another verse from the Gita in that memorial address to all the people and staffers and workers at that project site. And that line is from chapter 17 and verse 11 of the Gita, which is about the fact that a person's faith defines that person. Krishna talks about faith being the ultimate thing, and that is what he quotes with regard to the departed President Roosevelt as well. So that's very interesting. Now the test becomes successful in July 1945, and absolutely horrific bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan takes place the following month in August, the 6th of August 1945 to be precise. And it is 2 decades later, in 1965, in an interview to the NBC, that Robert Oppenheimer talks about this line, Kalosmi, that came to his mind when the fireball went up into the sky in July 1945, and he saw that the test which he was in charge of was successful. Very interestingly, the Gita seems to have been somewhat a part of his life, because when he is constructing the bomb, when he is heading the project at Los Alamos in New Mexico, Oppenheimer is interviewed a number of times by a number of journalists across the US and from other countries as well. And he keeps on saying to those journalists, he keeps on saying in discussions with fellow nuclear scientists, they are having a debate on whether a bomb is good or not, whether they should work to develop the bomb or not because of its destructive nature. And Oppenheimer keeps saying to those scientists that it's not for us scientists to decide. It's our responsibility, it's our duty. But we have to do our duty. So this concept of duty somewhere is a part of his thinking, that he thinks that it's for the politicians to make those decisions, and my karma, as the Gita says it, and as Krishna tells Arjun to follow his karma in the Gita, my karma is to do my work as a nuclear scientist and to develop the bomb. And his belief throughout is that this bomb is going to end all wars. So this is what they have convinced themselves. The nuclear scientists have convinced themselves that this is what they are doing. At the same time, naturally there is conflict in their minds, because the bomb is indeed going to be destructive. And he's clearly keeping the Gita in mind when he's dealing with that conflict. So it's fascinating how Oppenheimer read the Gita in the original, studied the Gita in the original, like many nuclear scientists, many physicists like Niels Bohr. He also read Sanskrit and could read Sanskrit documents. It's another matter that we Indians don't read Sanskrit. But it's fascinating that he read up on the subject. He read so deeply. He read philosophy deeply. Before I end this video, there's another fascinating anecdote that I'd like to mention. Somewhere towards the end of his life, he was interviewed by a magazine and he was asked about the 10 books that influenced him the most. He quotes another book from Sanskrit, and that is Bhartruhari's Shatakatrayam. That is another classical work of Sanskrit. So of the 10 books that he quotes, 2 are Sanskrit books, Sanskrit original books, and a third book has a link to Sanskrit. I'll mention that also. That is T.S. Eliot's Wasteland, because it has references to Upanishadic truths. So it's fascinating that 3 of the books that he cites have references to specifically Indian and specifically Hindu philosophy. He had a tremendous link with India and with Indian thinking and with Indian philosophy. All of this makes it very clear to us that Sanskrit and Oppenheimer and the Gita were in a way inextricably linked, and it's a thread in a way that runs through his life ever since he starts learning Sanskrit. Thank you, dear friends. If you like this video, I hope it has busted certain myths about what you have read about Oppenheimer and the Gita. If you like the video, do subscribe to my channel and also press the notification button, the bell button, so that you get notifications about my next videos. Thank you so much, and lovely to see you again. Thanks.